Hi guys, welcome back. This is thankfully the last part of the 4-part essay series on the politics of post-coloniality, an essay by Ejaz Ahmed. Okay, so this is almost a conclusive section, so we'll keep it nice and short as promised in the previous video. And in the spirit of keeping things short, I'm not including a recap of the previous videos here. If you need a glimpse, I'll be recounting all the previous points at the end of this video, so please refer to that in case you need a quick recap. So in this section, Ahmed highlights the problems of the two oppositional viewpoints previously discussed in this essay. And what are the two viewpoints? The first is cultural differentialism and the second is a global cultural hybridity. You can see that these are two oppositional concepts created by people who believe in certain homogenizing viewpoints. The first is cultural differentialism. I would want you to remember this term and understand it well because this will be repeated a couple of times in the whole essay, in the whole section, sorry. What is cultural differentialism? The cultural nationalist politics of the discourse of authenticity, purity of identity and proto-fascism. What did I just say? What is authenticity, purity of identity and proto-fascism? When the RSS people tell us that India belongs only to the Hindus and that there is a fixed Hindu identity that all Hindus will follow naturally, they are advocating a cultural differentialist politics. This is the politics of an authentic identity on the basis of which right-wing organizations like the RSS and other right-wing organizations, they form proto-fascist agendas in order to divert the working masses of the country from progressive politics, from progressive projects, all right. Examples of cultural differentialism is militant Hindutva, on the basis of which people indulge in riots even, and prescriptive Islam. These are the two examples of cultural differentialist politics. The first one I told you was cultural differentialism. The second oppositional viewpoint to this viewpoint is global cultural hybridity, a mingling of cultural identity, and here I am talking about a global cultural hybridity professed by postmodern, post-colonial critics. There is a cultural hybridity and Ahmed will tell you about it later in this essay. But the sort of hybridity he critiques is the one which includes the mingling of different cultural identities which are formed in the contingent moment of displacement. The kind of cultural hybridity that is available only to the migrant postmodern intellectual residing in the advanced capitalist countries. People who are well versed, acquainted with the concepts we discussed in the previous videos will find no problem in understanding these concepts because we have talked about them to quite a great length on those videos. So these are the two oppositional viewpoints that he is going to critique, and he is going to tell you the problems in both these approaches, obviously. So in this section, while he calls Bhabha's concept of a global postmodern hybridity a hyper-reality conceivable only by elite migrants with surplus means, he also enlightens us with how actual people in actual life encounter each other within national boundaries and they also encounter hybridity. So saying that hybridity can only be experienced in international spaces with a postmodernist viewpoint, in Ahmed's opinion, it is a mistake. Okay, and we'll see how. So the writing in this section was a little dense, although the points were not difficult to understand. So I have broken up the paragraphs into about 2 or 3 parts each paragraph for your better understanding. So let's start with the text, and I'm reading. I have argued that the contemporary dialectic of imperialist capital involves both A. more profound penetration of all available global spaces, and B. greater proliferation of the nation state form with contradictory effects in the fields of culture and ideology, in a situation where rapid realignments of political hegemony on the global scale are producing among the professional intelligentsia a characteristic loss of historical depth and perspective. So Ahmed begins by reminding you that in the previous section he said that the dialectic of imperialist capital is resulting into two trends. Around the world, two trends are seen. Number one, transnational capital is penetrating deeper and deeper into available global spaces. He gave you so many examples about the fact that yes, global capital is penetrating deeper and deeper. Stronger nations are investing in weaker nations, and there's no control of national authorities on this. But side by side, he told you in the dialectic of imperialism that the nation state is proliferating, the nation state form is proliferating with contradictory effects. How the nation state form is proliferating with contradictory effects? He told you about the Irani mullahs and saffron yuppies who have a commodity fetish but also forge the discourse of pure identity and cultural differentialism to divert the attention of the working masses from more progressive projects. Also, Ahmed informs that there have been rapid realignments of political hegemony around the world. How they exert political force, how countries exert political pressure, it's changing in the contemporary times. And all this leaves the professional intelligentsia, like the cultural theorists, with a loss of historical depth and perspective. This is a point that Ahmed has made in the paragraph. But how this realignment of political hegemony leaves the professional intelligentsia with a loss of historical depth and perspective? See, the nation state is strengthening, it is clear. He gave you the example of Asia and countries in Asia, Africa, of Germany, of the new ethnically based nation states in Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe. So we know that the nation state is strengthening, but at the same time global capital penetration is also getting more and more aggressive. We can't decide, critics can't decide, theorists can't decide whether the imperial capital structures or the national authority is getting stronger. There's a confusion sort of in the field of culture and ideology. The same people who cry that their culture is being corrupted by foreign influence are the same people who enjoy the pleasures of foreign consumerism. So Ahmed believes that the lack of historical perspective and depth in these critics is due to this phenomena, due to the dialectic of imperialism. All right, so let's get back to the same paragraph, but lines that say, the tendency in cultural criticism is to waver constantly between the opposing polarities of cultural differentialism and cultural hybridity. There, he said it. We have on the one hand, so in the whole paragraph he is going to explain cultural differentialism, and in the next paragraph he is going to take up cultural hybridity. So he says, the tendency in cultural criticism is to waver constantly between the opposing polarities of cultural differentialism and cultural hybridity. We have, on the one hand, so extreme a rhetoric against reason and universality and such finalist ideas of cultural difference that each culture is said to be so discrete and self-referential, so autonomous in its own authority, as to be unavailable for cognition or criticism from a space outside itself, lest the outsider be seen as a bearer of that enlightenment rationality which is said to be colonizing and repressive. The ideational logic of this cultural differentialism is to privilege self-representation over all other kinds of representation and to treat self-representation as a moment of absolute authenticity, as if between the self and its representation there could be no moment of bad faith or false consciousness. In its softer form, the logic of this position is that of pure identity politics. In the harder form, this same logic produces those many proto-fascism that are stalking the world from Iran to the former Yugoslavia and from France to India. So he just said that the critics are in a confused state. In this confused state, the tendency among cultural critics wavers into two directions, according to Ahmed. And I told you, number one direction is cultural differentialism and the other is cultural hybridity. Ahmed goes on to say that both these tendencies have problems. And what is the problem with cultural differentiation? He is going to cover that in this paragraph. The first problem with cultural differentialism is that they are extremely against reason and universality. The moment someone says the word reason or the word universality, they immediately consider that person as an agent of the Enlightenment thinking, because these two concepts emerged from there, and the person is immediately considered as a Western agent trying to dominate the others. And the second problem is that they are extremely finalist about their cultural difference, that they are sure that their difference is unique, their culture is unique, their culture is different from everybody else. And number three, the third problem is that their culture, they think is so self-referential, so autonomous in its own authority, that is, it is unavailable to any person from a space outside itself for understanding and criticism. So what this means is that their culture is self-referential. They think that we are so autonomous, not dependent on anybody else. We are so authorized to refer to ourselves, give our examples, talk about ourselves, that it is this culture is not available to any person outside the space of this particular culture. Okay? Anybody from an outside space who tries to understand cultures like this is understood as an agent of the Enlightenment rationality, which is considered a tool of colonial domination and nothing else. You remember how the Enlightenment thinkers understood some cultures as backward and mysterious, and it's on that basis that they justified colonialism. So on this justification, anybody who tries to understand or criticize these cultures is considered as an agent of the Enlightenment thinking. This is the attitude of cultural differentialism. Consider your culture different from others, totally autonomous, totally self-referential. Only people from within the culture are authorized to talk about it. Okay? So this attitude privileges self-representation over all other kinds of representation. Only we are authorized to talk about ourselves, to represent ourselves. They think that self-representation is a moment of absolute authenticity. Even if, imagine, for example, a right-wing Hindu is trying to self-represent, how do you know there will not be a moment of false consciousness or bad faith? What is bad faith? There might be a deliberate misrepresentation, that is bad faith, and false consciousness means not being able to understand our culture in the right way. And both these flaws, both false consciousness and bad faith, will lead to a flaw in representation. So one can't say that self-representation is a moment of absolute authenticity. There may be problems in self-representation. And what are the problems that may arise in self-representation? A false consciousness or bad faith. Okay? So this cultural differentialism, Ahmed says, takes two forms. In its softer form, it is the discourse of pure identity politics of an authentic Hindu or Muslim or black identities or white identities. So these are the cultural differentialist identities that it creates. And in its hardcore forms, we have proto-fascism. The one, perhaps, for example, the one we encountered in the Gujarat riots in the 2002 is a hardcore form of the cultural differentialist notions, the proto-fascist notions of cultural differentialism. The one we encountered in the Muzaffarnagar riots in 2013. These are the kinds of hardcore forms of cultural differentialist politics. And Ahmed says that this is happening in countries from Iran and France to Africa. All right. So this is all about cultural differentialism, and by now you should be crystal clear as to what he means, what Ahmed means by cultural differentialism, and what are the problems that he thinks are associated with it. And with this, we move ahead with the text. At the other end of the spectrum, we have so vacuous a notion of cultural hybridity as to replace all historicity with mere contingency, to lose all sense of specificity in favor of the hyper reality of an eternal and globalized present. and to dispense with all structural persistence of the longue durée so remorselessly that the present becomes both opaque and wholly self-referential. Bhabha's own polemic against what he calls the long past and organic nation is significant in this regard. It is doubtless true that modern electronics have given to corporate capital unprecedented powers to penetrate spaces that had hitherto remained relatively unreachable. It is also true that the contemporary phase of capital involves unprecedented scales of movement, not only of capital and commodities but also personnel. So Ahmed just told you that there are two ends of this spectrum. At one end is cultural differentialist politics. At the other end, he says, there are the proponents of a global cultural hybridity, a concept that is so vast and has become, with postmodernism, so vague that it ends up meaning almost nothing specifically. Okay? The problems with a global cultural hybridity, and I am not going to explain it to you now because the last section, the previous section was all about global cultural hybridity. So please refer to that. What are the problems with global cultural hybridity? Number one, it replaces all historicity with contingency. What does this mean? All sense of history, the importance of history, and those who have done new historicism by now know that history is quite important, that history does play a part in the present discourse. So dispensing away with historicity is not the perhaps the right approach to take. The problem with this cultural hybridity is the fact that it does away, it replaces all historicity and gives most importance to the contingent moment. Contingency was also discussed in the previous lecture thoroughly, so please refer to that. You will instantly understand how historicity is replaced with contingency in Bhabha's politics if you have watched the third section. Okay? This is the first problem, that it replaces all historicity with contingency. Second, this hybridity, the global cultural hybridity that Bhabha constructs, it loses all sense of specificity. Specific cultures are never mentioned, specific personalities, specific traits of countries, of cultures, of communities are never mentioned in his discussion of hybridity. He and the other postmodern, post-colonial critics, they create a hyper reality of an eternal and globalized present. All they focus on a globalized present that is eternal, and Ahmed says it's a hyper reality that they construct. It's not something that is actually happening around the globe. Then he says that it does away with all the structural persistence of longue durée. What is longue durée? The study of long histories, of studying of ages and ages of histories. So he says that this sort of cultural hybridity, of course, when it replaces historicity with contingency, it obviously does away with longue durée, the endurance, the continuation of long histories. So it does away with these long histories so remorselessly that the present becomes opaque and wholly self-referential. So this, I guess, you will not understand instantly how doing away with history makes the present opaque. So in theories like New Historicism, if you've read about them, we have realized that the present becomes better understandable if we consider the historical context and the historical conditions which have led to the present. We understand it better when we understand it in the relation to factors related to other historical ages, other places, other cultures and other political economies. So in short, knowing history makes you understand present better. If you do away with history, historicity, specificity, you will understand the present in opaque terms. The present in the contingent moment just becomes something that is self-referential, only has itself to refer, has nothing beyond, before, after, no history, no sense of a past. Okay? So, you know how postmodernism reduces the role of history and related concepts and pays attention only to the contingent moment. So, in postmodernist view, by deleting all histories and all cultural contexts, it makes the present opaque and self-referential. Ahmed says Bhabha's critique against what he calls the long past and the organic nation speaks of such an attitude. Ahmed admits that although it is true that modern electronics have empowered the corporate capital, stronger countries are reaching other countries with the help of modern electronics. They are selling their commodities by advertisements and other means of reaching all the people in all the nations. But with the coming of globalization, it's not only capital that's traveling from countries to from country to country. It's also people whose movement has been unprecedented after globalization. I come back to the text now. It is also the case, however, that the entire logic of the kind of cultural hybridity that Bhabha celebrates presumes the intermingling of Europe and non-Europe in a context already determined by advanced capital in the aftermath of colonialism. In this account, non-Europeans hardly ever encounter each other and never without a prior European modulation of the very field of that encounter. Nor do these celebrations of hybridity foreground the unequal relations of cultural power today. Rather, intercultural hybridity is presented as a transaction of displaced equals which somehow transcends the profound inequalities engendered by colonialism itself. Into whose culture is one to be hybridized, and on whose terms? The willful relegation of this question to obscurity reveals, nevertheless, that the underlying logic of this celebratory mode is that of the limitless freedom of a globalized marketplace, which pretends that all consumers are equally resourceful and in which all cultures are equally available for consumption in any combination that the consumer desires. Only to the extent that all cultures are encountered in commodified forms does it become possible to claim that none commands more power than any other, or that the consumer alone is the sovereign of all hybridization. This playful hybridity conceals the fact that commodified cultures are equal only to the extent of their commodification. So, Ahmed tries to tell you that the kind of cultural hybridity that Bhabha endorses presumes that the intermingling of Europe and non-Europe happens in a context already determined by advanced capital in the aftermath of colonialism. What this means is that when Europe and non-Europe interact, who decides the term of such interaction? Of course, the Europeans who have ruled over so much of the non-Europe, they carry the master mentality, the superior vision of class, taste, art, sophistication at the time of such interaction. So, obviously, the non-Europe still carries a sense of awe, a sense of being subordinate to European culture, European people. So, this context is already decided by colonialism in which they will interact in Bhabha's conception, I must say. In such hybridity, where Europe and non-Europe interact with each other in a colonial context, no mention is made in this conception of hybridity, no mention is made of non-European people interacting with each other. Bhabha doesn't talk about it, and even if they do, the context is already set by Europe. What this means is that in Bhabha's conception of this hybridity, only the migrant intellectual situated in the advanced capital nation is able to experience such hybridity. So, when the migrants interact with each other, it is in a cultural space and environment already modified by European assertion of their superior position. Migrants from non-Europe countries going to Europe, being migrant, being intellectual, having experienced displacement, having experienced the moment of contingency, they will interact with other non-Europeans in a European environment, in a European context. They are already the colonized, Europe is already the colonizer. So, they will interact with each other only a context set out by Europe. Okay? So when Bhabha talks about such hybridity, he never takes into account the unequal relations of cultural power today. Even today, the cultural power among the various nations of the world are not equal. His conception pretends that hybridity is a sort of erasing of fixed identity, a sort of removal of all barriers of inequality. Ahmed asks, into whose culture is one hybridized and on whose terms? Who hybridizes whom? Obviously, the non-Europe hybridizes into the culture of Europe on terms decided by Europe. Ahmed also says that the willful avoidance of this question, who hybridizes whom, willful avoidance of this question reveals that what they are celebrating as cultural hybridity is based on the conception of limitless freedom. It's just a conception, it's not an actuality. They conceive that in a globalized market space, all cultures have equal means and they have equal desire to access the pleasures of global commodity culture. All right. So this is how that equality is pretended on the basis of a globalized market space, assuming I must say, assuming that every culture is equal in terms of means and in terms of desire to partake the pleasures of global commodity culture. Okay? Only by pretending this, these postmodern, post-colonial critics, only by pretending this equality among cultures, which is actually a pretended equality, an assumed equality which is not actually there, only by pretending this they can justify that all cultures are equal in terms of power, that the consumer alone is the head, the sovereign in all hybridization. This attitude, Ahmed argues, conceals the fact that all cultures are not equal. They do not have either the means or the desire, if not both, to enjoy or consume the commodification the West offers the non-Europe in terms of capital investments into commodities culture. Okay? Moving on with the text. At the deepest level, however, the stripping of all cultures of their historicity and density, reducing them to those lowest common denominators, which then become interchangeable, produces not a universal equality of all cultures, but the unified culture of late imperial marketplace that subordinates cultures, consumers and critics alike to a form of untethering and moral loneliness that wallows in the depthlessness and whimsicality of postmodernism, the cultural logic of late capitalism. In Jameson's superb phrase, in a great many guises, including the guises of hybridity, contingency, etc. So, the primary problem, the basic fault according to Ahmed in this point of view, in this conception of cultural hybridity, is of understanding the whole world as available and desiring for consumption of commodities like the West is. The problem is that it strips all cultures of their historicity and density. This conception of hybridity only understands other culture in terms of the present. And in terms of market forces, not as cultures with dense customs, rituals, practices, beliefs, personalities, structures and enduring histories. All cultures are made to appear so homogeneous, lacking specific features that they appear to be interchangeable in the late imperial marketplace. So, this attitude subordinates cultures by homogenizing them. It subordinates cultures, consumers and critics in the form of an untying people from their roots. By homogenizing them, it kind of cuts them from their roots on which their moral attitudes earlier depended. And all that is done under the guise of postmodernism, which Jameson had called the cultural logic of late capitalism. What is the logic of late capitalism? How do they justify it? Through postmodernism. And this postmodernism includes and rather thrives on the concepts such as hybridity and contingency, etc. Coming back to the text, against this conception of hybridity, it would be erroneous to posit those claims of authenticity that come to us from so many religious revivalisms and proto-fascist nationalisms of our time. However, this hybridity must also be sharply distinguished from that very common life process through which people move within national boundaries or encounter each other without mediation by colonialism and its aftermath. In one form or another, such cross fertilization of cultures has been endemic to all movements of people from country to city, from city to city, from one site of labor to another at shorter or longer distances. And all such movements in history have involved the travel, contact, transmutation, hybridization of ideas, values, and behavioral norms. So Ahmed goes on to tell you that between these two conceptions of cultural differentiation or cultural hybridity, neither is acceptable. There is actually a kind of hybridity that is at work in most human interactions. And these hybridities are not international, they need not be international. In order to experience hybridity, one doesn't have to leave his own place and his identity and his nation to be situated in another culture that is modified by colonial history. He says that actual hybridity, away from the perceptions of postmodern, post-colonial critics, is actually a life process, a common life process through which people move within national boundaries or encounter each other without any mediation by colonialism and its after effects. If a person moves from one place to another, village to city, city to city, one site of labor to another site of labor at shorter or longer distances, Ahmed says that all such movements result in a cross fertilization of cultures, they give and take culturally. So, for example, when a person from Bengal moves to complete their studies in Punjab, both the Bengali and the Punjabi take from each other certain cultural traits and thus become a little more hybrid every time they encounter a person or space that previously was occupied by some other person, or even presently is occupied by some other person or community. So, the travel, the contact with each other, it results in a kind of transmutation, the hybridization of ideas, of values and behavior. It is not only that when a person from a non-European country moves to an advanced European country that he will experience hybridity. If someone conceives hybridity in that way, according to Ahmed, it's a flawed conception. Okay, let's move ahead with the text. Thus, it is that not only Hinduism, which is by its nature multiform, but also Islam, despite its scripturalist component, has led myriad different cultural lives at different times and locations. Far from being specifically postmodern, physical mobilities and cultural cross-fertilization are woven into the dynamics of historical time itself, in an unending dialectic of persistence and change, so that communities and individuals are neither mere repetitions of the past nor ever free to refashion themselves sui generis out of any clay that happens to be at hand. So, it is not only Hinduism, Ahmed says, that is by nature multiform, but also Islam, that despite its reliance on its scriptures and its strictness, even Islam has led a variety of different cultural lives, and this can be seen in so many ways that Hinduism and Islam differ from their own forms. Hinduism in one country is different from Hinduism in another country. Islam in one country and culture and community may differ from another country, community and culture in other countries. So, and it changes from time to time. So, Hinduism, Islam and so many other concepts are multiform. Ahmed says that this cultural cross-fertilization one experiences when they move is not postmodern, as Bhabha says. Rather, it is based on historicity. And you must remember that postmodernism rejects the role of history. But Ahmed says that this hybridity is based on its historicity. There is an unending dialectic of change and persistence. Some aspects of history change, some aspects of history persist. And therefore, communities and individuals are neither mere repetitions of the past, nor they are free to refashion themselves in a unique way in any circumstances that are present. So as I told you, some aspects of history change and some persist. People are neither the repetitions of the past as the proponents of cultural differentialism and authenticity profess, like the BJP and the RSS and the Irani mullahs profess, like the proponents of an essential Hindu identity or an essential Islamic identity profess. But nor are people ever free to reinvent, realize themselves, refashion themselves with each passing day, as the proponents of contingency and displacement and global hybridity suggest. Okay, so let's come back to the text. That one is free to invent oneself and one's community over and over again as one goes along is usually an illusion induced by availability of surpluses, of money capital or cultural capital or both. That frenzied and constant refashioning of the self through which one merely consumes oneself under the illusion of consuming the world is a specific mode of postmodern alienation which Bhabha mistakenly calls hybridity, contingency, post-coloniality. So, Ahmed believes that the assertion that one is free to invent oneself and one's community over and over again is usually an illusion induced by availability of surpluses, of money surplus or cultural surplus or both. So, he says when people have time and money to invest, one can think of refashioning themselves in terms of career, in terms of personality, in terms of culture, in terms of their politics. They can reinvent themselves. So, and you must know that Marxists, the most Marxists think that the assertion that one can change their life for better whenever they want with willpower, hard work and perhaps some self-help books is absolute bullcrap according to them. They say it is a luxury available only to the classes with surplus money and cultural capital. So, the frenzy about constant refashioning of the self is a specific mode of postmodern alienation which Bhabha mistakenly calls hybridity. He calls it contingency and post-coloniality. Ahmed thinks that Bhabha's belief that one rediscovers oneself at the moment of displacement and contingency with hybridity is only another way people consume themselves. They become unhappy, frustrated when they find that changing oneself is not really possible for everyone. It is another way of experiencing postmodern alienation, the kind of directionlessness people feel when they try to understand things from a postmodern view. Why? Because postmodernism celebrates the end of most structures like history, Marxism and others. So, people feel alienated in this hoopla about postmodernist end of everything, and contingency and hybridity and post-coloniality are ways in which this alienation expresses itself. Rather being a tool of refashioning one's life and reinventing oneself as these postmodern, post-colonial elite critics think, it's rather a way in which the postmodern alienation expresses itself, according to Ahmed, I'm reading from the text now. In the finalist notions of cultural differentialism, whereby no culture is or ought to be available for correction by another culture, historical time is simply denied as actually having happened. Instead, a mythic past is posited as the only true moment of cultural authenticity, hence the only measure of time, so that the vocation of history is to turn upon itself and recoup that mythic measure and rehabilitate that lost but ever-present authenticity, always in pursuit of a past that never was. So, Ahmed comes back to cultural differentialism again. He says even the ideas of cultural differentialism, where no culture is available for correction or critique or understanding by another culture, this attitude denies historical time as something that really happened. What they see, if they don't see history as what actually happened, they hail a mythic past. They celebrate the era of the Ramayana, of the Mahabharata. They celebrate it as the only true moment of cultural authenticity, so that the only thing that they rely on is going back to the moment again and again, ignoring how actual history changes. Attitudes don't remain the same as they are portrayed in the mythic narratives, and they try to rehabilitate the moment that is long lost but in a way the moment is ever present in their values, in their discourses of authenticity. So they pursue a past that never really was. They also create a hyper reality by ignoring history, by denying actual history. Okay. So I am coming back to the text. On the other hand, the celebratory invocations of a uniquely postmodern hybridity, uniquely available to migrants residing in metropolitan cities and emanating from there to the rest of the globe, is, in a profound sense, simply the opposite of cultural differentialism, equally anti-historical, even though denying the actuality of historical depth in its own terms as mere myth of origin, myths of deep nation and the long past. The striking thing, of course, is that strands in post-structuralist thought are equally available to both these anti-histories, the identitarian particularist anti-history as well as the globalizing hybridist anti-history. So, in a closing argument, Ahmed says that on the other hand, from cultural differentialism, and yes, he is not done yet, he comes back to the cultural hybridity part. He says that the celebration of a uniquely postmodern hybridity, which is only available to migrant intellectuals residing in metropolitan cities, is actually the opposite of cultural differentialism. We are clear on that by now. He says, and in what terms it is opposite, that it is anti-historical by denying the depth. This is also anti-historical, but this one, the cultural hybridity attitude, denies the depth of history by criticizing history as a mere myth of origin, myth of deep nation and the long past. Those are the ways in which postmodern, postcolonial critics have rejected the role of history, the role history plays in postcolonial theory. So at the end he says, both these forms of anti-history, the identitarian particularist anti-history, which is cultural differentialism, denies actual history and hangs on to a mythic past. And the other aspect, the globalizing hybridist history, it celebrates the end of history by introducing the concept of contingency and displacement, have strong elements, both these attitudes have strong elements, and pay attention, that are also present in the post-structuralist thought. Post-structuralist thought is also somewhat similar to postmodern thought. So in a way, he concludes by saying that both these flawed attitudes of cultural differentialism and cultural hybridity are somehow inspired by postmodernism, a Western elitist theoretical concept. And this is the biggest problem Ahmed has with these critics, all right. So this is how he wraps up the essay, and we are done so gratefully. But as I promised, I am going to revise everything that we have done till now from part 1 to part 4 here. In part 1, Ahmed takes Spivak's passage and critiques it. The fact that she believes that colonialism has given colonized countries some sort of legacy in the form of democracy, constitutionality, nationhood, citizenship. He critiques her for such ideas and tells us how her facts are utterly misplaced. In part 2, he discusses how the term post-coloniality came to be, how it emerged with no connection with the previous actual material debates that took place in the 70s. And he then goes on to tell us the problems of this conception of this term as conceived by postmodern, postcolonial critics situated in the advanced capitalist countries. In part 3, he critiques 3 concepts of these theorists. First was the concept of hybridity, contingency, ambivalence. Second is their belief in the collapse of the nation state. And third is their belief in the coming of a globalized postmodern electronic culture. Okay. In this part, we covered the problems of both attitudes of cultural differentialism and cultural hybridity as conceived by these critics. Cultural differentialism denies actual history by hanging on to the image of a perfect mythic past. Cultural hybridity celebrates intermingling of culture, but only in the case of migrant intellectuals who are situated in the advanced capitalist nations and are postmodern in their inclinations. These critics deny history in their celebration of a postmodern end of history. Ahmed says, in actual life, movement of people as well as their cross-fertilization, they're affecting each other in a hybrid manner, is endemic, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, and it is not mediated by postmodernism or post-structuralism to any extent. All right. So this is the end of this essay. If it helped you, please consider subscribing the channel and sharing it with your friends. Thanks a lot for watching. Have a nice day.